So, so welcome to what is, I think, the fifth and the final HoPIN event of 2023. My name's Caroline Archer, and I'm the co-director of the Centre for Printing History and Culture, of which HoPIN is a constituent part. HoPIN is usually chaired by John Hinks, but I've been given the honour of hosting tonight's event. Before we begin, and in case we don't have time at the end, I'd just like to say a few thank yous. Firstly, to thank all those speakers who presented at this year's sessions, which have, without exception, been of a very high standard. A thank you too, of course, to John Hinks, who is the convener of HoPIN and the driving force behind these events. And finally, a very big and warm thank you to our colleagues at the University of Wolverhampton, who have, for the last 2 years, provided the digital platform from which we broadcast. I'd particularly like to thank Claire Buckerfield and to Amelia, in whose capable hands we've trusted the technical running of these events. So this evening is a bit of fun by which to end the year, and all talks are appropriately around the theme of festivals. We've got 7 speakers tonight who will give us a series of kind of quick fire talks on a variety of aspects of a variety of celebrations. The talks are going to be divided into 2 sessions, 4 speakers in the first session and 3 in the second session. After each session, we have 10 minutes for Q&A. If you have any questions for our speakers, which I hope you do, just put them in the Q&A box and I will relay them on your behalf to the speakers. I'm going to introduce each speaker individually, after which it's over to them to inform, instruct, and entertain. So let's begin. So first up, our first speaker is KRISTIN BLUEMEL, and she is Professor of English at Monmouth University in New Jersey. Over to Chris.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me in New Jersey. I am going to give a talk, which I'm sharing the title slide now, and you should see on your screen Joan Hassall's The Marriage of Robin Redbreast and the Wren. And this is a teeny talk that is derived from my forthcoming book called Enchanted Wood, which is about 4 women wood engravers who were active in the mid-20th century. But here we go, Joan Hassall. In 1945, the most popular of Joan Hassall's Saltire chapbooks, The Marriage of Robin Redbreast and the Wren, was published in Edinburgh by the Saltire Society. Illustrated with 9 unique wood engravings, it was promoted to members of the Saltire Society and the Scottish reading public as the perfect Christmas gift, with illustrations that would inspire reflection and amusement in old and young alike. Hassall had come to Edinburgh from London early in 1941 to teach printing and composition at the Edinburgh College of Art. She was 39 at the time, young enough to be willing to try a new life in a new city, and old enough to have established a reputation as one of Britain's most original and skilled wood engravers, working in Thomas Bewick's English white line tradition. The cover design of The Marriage of Robin Redbreast and the Wren communicates the technical, formal, and tonal qualities that earned Hassall such comparisons. The extraordinary control and detail, the subtle sense of humor, the allusions to the decorative elements of 18th century wood engraved vignettes, all these are apparent upon initial examination and enchanted readers in Scotland and beyond. The delicate double borders that frame the chapbook's front combine rigid linear patterns with graceful curves and arcs, all directing our eyes to the central image of wee Robin and his wife, themselves encircled by the graceful petals of a flowered wreath that is knotted with a bow. The pleasing symmetry of the cover of The Marriage of Robin Redbreast and the Wren, so suitable for a book that ends with a happy marriage, is so. And here you have the end of nearing the end of the chapbook. So here's the marriage. So this is typical of Hassall's Saltire chapbooks, the last of which Rashi Coat was published in 1951. This was 6 years after Hassall had returned to England and long after critics had declared the end of the 1930s wood engraving revival. Aside from the colored borders that decorate the covers, Hassall Saltire chapbooks tell their tales in words and pictures worked out in black type and black image on white page. Words and pictures are equal in this regard, furthering the chapbook's commitment to values of balance, harmony, and equilibrium. Each is very small, a mere 3.5 by 5 1/4 inches. According to print and design historian Rosemary Addison, the World War II period Saltire chapbooks were intended to recall not just the size, but all the content, but also the contents and functions of 18th century Scottish chapbooks that were filled with subversive stories or Jacobite songs and verses and were sold by peddlers throughout the backwaters of the land. And the Saltire chapbooks, though more elegantly designed than their 18th century models, were equally ephemeral. Miniature, fragile, compliant with wartime economy restrictions on paper, they were priced at an affordable 1 shilling. They announced themselves as lightweight paper books for the people, small, inexpensive, short, and presumably short-lived. In the words of print and wood engraving scholar David Chambers, quote, "Slight pamphlets, though these all were, they yet contain a great deal of Hassall's most pleasing and finely engraved work." Cheap and beautiful. It is this unusual combination of qualities that in Scotland in the mid-1940s made the Saltire Society's edition of The Marriage of Robin Redbreast so popular with readers. The Saltire Society Publications Committee report of 1945-1946 records, "We doubled our issue of chapbooks this year, printing 4,000 instead of 2,000, and were amply justified by the results. The Marriage of Robin Redbreast and the Wren was immensely popular and had sold out a week before Christmas." The popularity of Hassall's version of the story was in part an expression and confirmation of cultural associations that white line wood engraving had acquired during the wood engraving revival of the previous 2 decades. For common readers, these associations included a whole array of feelings and ideas circulating around vague and idealized notions of morality, nation, and tradition. But no matter whether Robin Redbreast attracted adult or child readers, print collectors, or Christmas consumers, popularity itself as a literary value is endorsed by the editor's note on the origins of the tale. The chapbook's last verso page reads, "The above little story is taken down from the recitation of Mrs. Begg, the sister of Robert Burns. The poet was in the habit of telling it to the younger members of his father's household, and Mrs. Begg's impression is that he made it for their amusement." From Robert Chambers' Popular Rhymes of Scotland, and that's 1826. These words position the chapbook as a modern fulfillment of a popular 19th century oral literary history, one defined by Robert Burns within the bosom of his adoring family, and the publisher Chambers listening to and collecting rhymes from the humblest of poets' children. Curiously, in urban Edinburgh during World War II, the highly trained London visual artist Joan Hassall finds herself inheriting a distinctly Scottish popular verbal literary tradition. Her Christmas chapbook acquires through paratextual forms, hints, and gestures Scottish, national, and nationalist significance. In my reading of the chapbook, the self-effacing spinster illustrator, Joan Hassall, acquires through the benefits of association Robin's heroic qualities of pluck, wit, and perseverance as he and his illustrator make their way through Robert Burns' happy Yuletide romance. Hassall arrived in the dusty northern city of Edinburgh when women on the home front were encouraged to fill positions that were left vacant by male artists and printers who had enlisted in the armed services. In a letter to wood engraving expert Rory McLean, dated 25 August 1950, Hassall describes the conditions that initially soured her feelings towards her new home. "You will be horrified to know how deeply I felt the exile from the South when I was in Edinburgh. I realize now is 1950, that my unhappiness was bred by the irksomeness and exhaustion of teaching, and also by a very definite hostility, which I was quite unprepared for, from some Scotland for the Scottish people, who resented my appointment. It took me quite 3 years to discover any Scots I really liked, but of course, by the end of my time there, I had made many loving and faithful friends, and had laid the foundation for that feeling for Edinburgh, which I do not deny that I have." MacLean extends the implications of the statement, claiming that Edinburgh gave Hassall her commissions and inspiration for some of her best work. Hassall herself described her satisfaction with her Edinburgh publishers, the Saltire Society and HoPIN Press, who each offered her, quote, "the only jobs I ever have done where I had complete control." We see this control in every line, every page design of The Marriage of Robin Redbreast. The story begins with Robin announcing to an old gray pussy. Oh, and here, American English, no attempt at Scots. The story begins with Robin announcing to an old gray pussy and then various other predatory animals that he is going awa to the king to sing him a sang this good Yule morning. In what is probably my favorite page of the chapbook, Robin finds himself in a winter wasteland confronted by Slee Todd Lowry sitting. We thrill at the prospect of Robin's undoing, even as the tale's narrative logic promises readers that Robin will escape Slee Todd Lowry, a fox who tries with silvered tongue to distract noble Robin from his mission to sing to the king. "Come here, wee Robin, and I'll let you see a bonny spot on the tap of my tail." It is Joan Hassall's illustration of a fox with rolling eyes and lolling tongue that conveys for speakers and readers of modern English the menace and danger of the encounter between Robin and Todd Lowry, prey and predator, on a frosty Christmas morning. Way back in the summer of 1945, Hassall's manipulations of her steel tools on the end grain of a small boxwood block anticipated the image that would emerge months later in the pages of this ephemeral Christmastime publication. Her image of a pair of animals in an uninhabited winter landscape assumes literary meaning through the illustrative contrast of white space and black ink lines, teaching us exactly how compelling, how seductive the Tapotod's tale might be. The archives of the National Library of Scotland have preserved the minutes of the Saltire Society Publications Committee, which met at Gladstone's Land on 25 September 1944 to discuss their plans for their Christmas 1945 chapbook. At the time, the committee secretary noted that, quote, "Miss Hassall's dummies for the proposed Robin Redbreast chapbook was handed round and warmly approved." These words are a testament to the committee members' appreciation of Hassall's artistry, but also to their collective investment in solving questions about the chapbook's visual and verbal contents. Recognizing the signs of a dynamic process recorded in otherwise dry minutes of Saltire Society committee meetings encourages us to regard Joan Hassall, the wood engraver, as an integral member of a collaborative group of important Scottish cultural figures. Together with the Saltire Society Publications Committee members, Hassall created The Marriage of Robin Redbreast and the Wren and the Saltire chapbooks more generally. Hassall is important, but not isolated, single, but not alone. Indeed, the minutes of the committee prove more than anything else that Joan Hassall worked at the center of an expansive and enduring print historical community, united by a love of her art of wood engraving. Thank you very much. And I'm going to apologize now that I have to leave for another appointment a little before your time, 6:30. Thank you.
Caroline, your microphone's on mute.
Sorry, I'm saying well done to Chris, bang on her 10 minutes, very well timed, thank you. So our next speaker is Brian MAIDMENT. Brian is Emeritus Professor of the History of Print at Liverpool John Moores University. So over to Brian.
Sorry, I'm just having trouble getting my screen to come up. Here we are. Should be here. There we are. The Book of Christmas was published by William Spooner for the 1836 Christmas market, variously dated 1836, 1837 on the title page. And I think the 1837 is a rapid reprint. And it was largely forgotten in the UK. But a bit more successful in America with editions in 1845 and 1888. And since 2000, it has had a new lease of life in a legend and folklore series issued by Wordsworth Editions. Written by T.K. Hervey and illustrated by Robert Seymour, the Book of Christmas formed a deliberate attempt to rival the fashionable annuals and gift books as a seasonal gift. In one illustration, it should be here, an extremely Pickwickian figure is cheerfully enjoying reading the Book of Christmas at his Christmas fireside, thus making a clear link between the book and the idea of gift giving. Tara Moore, in her excellent book, Victorian Christmas in Print, sees Hervey's book as bridging the gap between Regency publishing and the Victorian Christmas phenomenon. The book, both text and illustrations, suggests, she argues, the evolution of Christmas from a riotous hierarchical holiday to a decorous family celebration, providing in the process a national Christmas narrative through bringing together contemporary as well as recently forgotten codes of Christmas in one volume. She also astutely notes the tensions between an author, Hervey, looking towards Victorian values, and an illustrator, Robert Seymour, embedded in a late Regency comic visual culture. The ensuing dialogue between their respective genres showcases the conflict about who was sanctioned to participate in the revived English Christmas on the eve of the momentous Victorian Christmas. And that's Moore's comment. The publisher's worth a little bit of thought. William Spooner operated out of Regent Street from 1831 on, and then from 1837 up to his death in 1882 from premises on the Strand. Even if he didn't undertake the printing of his own illustrations and prints, he had access to printers able to work in the new medium of lithography, as well as more traditional etchings and engravings. His output was characteristic of the more obscure publishers from the 1830s, and that means his work appears to us as down market and ephemeral, but actually it was quite expensive, and however it looks to us, meant to appeal to quite wealthy customers. He made it innovative use of lithography to produce maps, jigsaw puzzles, and protean views, that is, prints which had moving parts or other mechanisms to alter the print depending on how you viewed it. And these are much prized now by antiquarian booksellers. Such products suggest that he was well aware of the seasonal hotspots in the publishing year and would have been keen to emphasize the possibilities of the Christmas trade. But his everyday trade was in single plate lithographs, like this one. I can find it. Organized and extended into carefully branded series called things like Droll Doings, Funny Characters, and as here, Notions of the Agreeable. And these have sort of dropped below the consideration of scholars these days. And I'm rather ashamed to say I am actually working on them quite seriously at the moment. Now, the author of the Book of Christmas was Thomas Hervey, Manchester Grammar School, Cambridge, started as a lawyer, but then went into journalism and writer, worked for the Athenaeum, later edited the Athenaeum, and his main work was really as editing and overseeing the literary annuals, which was such a prominent feature of the literary marketplace in the 1820s and the 1830s. This is a random picture of subtitles, and here is Friendship's Offering, perhaps the best known of the ones which he edited. He may also have worked for the Mirror of Literature, and this illustration in the Mirror of Literature also appears in the Book of Christmas by Seymour, so he may have had a look with Seymour quite early on. As an experienced editor, Hervey was well used to gathering material from available printed sources and bringing it together in new forms. One of his publications was an anthology called The English Helicon. Hervey thus was a writer closely attuned to the literary fads and fashions of the late Regency, and well able, again to use Tara Moore's words, string together a particular sequence of Christmas history in order to construct a line of descent that makes the preferred list of characteristics seem like they were always present. So the making of tradition. For more, Hervey is a writer keen to develop and perpetuate a myth of Christmas as an expression of a shared national identity. In other words, a writer looking beyond the streets of late Regency London to a celebration of a more settled and stable nation. In 1836, Seymour was in his late 30s after an arduous career as a versatile jobbing caricaturist and illustrator, and he'd become relatively well known, and certainly well enough known to be publishing extended series of prints in the early and mid 1830s under his own name. In monthly parts, he was a real innovator in terms of seriality. And this is one of his works from that period, New Readings of Old Authors. And what he's done here, he takes lines, random lines, often very insignificant lines from Shakespeare's plays, and punningly attaches a contemporary visual insight into social manners alongside them. And it absolutely destabilizes the Shakespeare text in really quite an interesting and actually quite upsetting way quite often. The society invokes in New Readings is grotesque and invigorating, unstable, and yet amusing. Seymour's humorous sketches, and this is a couple of his sketches comprising 180 plates, came out between 1834 and 1836 and appeared in a number of different forms. And he was also at this time doing a lot of magazine work for Figaro in London on the left and his own comic magazine on the right. Of nervy disposition and hideously overworked, his ill-fated encounter with Dickens, a cocky young author all too willing to wrest the original impetus of the Pickwick Papers away from its visual content towards an increasingly prolific text, finally resulted in Seymour's suicide. The Book of Christmas was one of Seymour's last commissions, and despite Hervey's celebratory text, his illustrations remain firmly rooted in the frequently acerbic, detailed social observation that characterized his work. Seymour's unremitting interest in deformity and degradation was based on close observation of metropolitan daily life and tempered by a delight in the visual diversity of the city. In his work, the exploitation of late 18th century grotesque is giving way to a more naturalistic and empathetic exploration of urban lives, something that is to become a central characteristic of the early Victorian novel. The illustrations to the Book of Christmas delineate Christmas as a public spectacle and commercial event, rather than a time of domestic family celebration. Seymour's Christmas is a largely outdoors phenomenon. Here are two images that center on the economic processes that underpin the celebrations. Bringing Christmas home on the left involves the mass importation of poultry to the capital. It's a rather beautiful image, I think, of the approach to London. On the right, a rural figure seems to step out of an ancient folk myth to bring an appropriate foliage to the domestic hearth. These seem to me celebratory images that stand in contrast to the more ambiguous observation of a busy Christmas market. At first sight, this seems an image of bustle and plenty, but closer inspection shows a level of disorder under the cheerful depiction of festive consumption. A drunk is being led away in the center of the image. A small child is shown suspiciously close to the pockets of a man ambling through the market, and produce is spilling wastefully and carelessly from the sack of a grocer's boy. In other words, this is a typical late Regency comic view of a disorderly society in which urban sociability is theatrical and threatening at the same time. An even more pronounced stress on urban disorder appears in Yeats, where a picturesque assembly of musicians is offering a street concert rather late in the evening, 11:15. The urchin playing the fiddle seems to operate in a world of his own, making little contact with the other musicians. In the background, a drunk woman, perhaps a prostitute, dances with insane energy in front of advertisements for spirit and wine. Windows have flown open in two houses and show enraged residents infuriated by this latest symptom of street noise, a character trope that heads straight back to Hogarth. The musical ensemble, trombone, cello, fiddle, and flute, is an improbable one that seems unlikely to be harmonious. So this is not, however comical it may be, a happy street. Christmas is a coming in with discord rather than harmony. Snapdragon shows that ought to be charming, but somehow to me looks much more ambiguous. Wide-eyed children register their delight in a Christmas game, but somehow the effect is less than celebratory. It somehow looks as if Right of Derby has painted the inmates of an asylum. The Book of Christmas is the joint work of three distinct late Regency sensibilities: an astute publisher, an overworked caricaturist, long versed in graphic satire, and an established literary journalist. The book is situated precisely on the cusp between late Regency and early Victorian sensibility. The author is seeking to build a tradition of national identity, British national identity, from a mass of inherited ideas about Christmas. The illustrator struggles with only partial success to find a celebratory or heroic dimension to a widespread manifestation of street culture. The publisher, recognizing the commercial opportunities offered by an emergent gift book market and a new focus on Christmas as a moment of national celebration, finds a way to bring together a jobbing writer and an established comic artist to make a book entirely apt for its historical moment.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for introducing us to Seymour. It's a name that I've not known before. Our next speaker is LORRAINE JANZEN KOOISTRA. Apologies if I pronounce your name incorrectly, Lorraine. Lorraine's Professor of English Emerita and Senior Research Fellow in the Centre for Digital Humanities at Toronto Metropolitan University. Over to Lorraine.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and to my fellow panelists, it's just a delight to learn both the two I've already learned from and the ones in anticipation about printed images associated with festivals past and present. So in my talk, celebrating Wren Day in Ireland, I'm focusing on a single illustration by Jack Yeats, which was published in the Green Sheaf, a little magazine associated with the Irish cultural revival in the early years of the 20th century, and probably not very well known to most of the audience. The printed image was hand-colored by the magazine's editor and publisher, Pamela Colman Smith, who had previously collaborated with Yeats on a broadsheet, which is another hand-colored print object associated with the revival that I'll be mentioning in my talk. So I'm going to begin with a brief discussion of Wren Day celebrations in Ireland, and then provide a print culture context for Yeats's illustration of the festival for the Green Sheaf. I want to say at the outset that I'm not a specialist in either the art of Jack Yeats or Irish studies. I come to this project through my work as director of Yellow 90s 2.0, which is an open access electronic resource for the study of 8 late Victorian little magazines. The Y90s magazine rack includes a digital edition of the Green Sheaf's 13 monthly issues, which were published between 1903 and 1904, and Yeats's Wren Day image was published in the 10th number. So Wren Day, which is also known as Wren's Day, Day of the Wren, and Hunt the Wren Day, and which should apparently be pronounced Wren Day, although I don't think I'll manage that very consistently, is celebrated in Ireland and in pockets of the British Isles and across Europe as well on December 26th, St. Stephen's Day. As a regional festival, practices are distinct across distinct localities, although there are usually some common aspects. Combining pagan and Christian, The ancient celebration is, according to Ireland's National Inventory of Intangible Cultural Heritage, quote, as unique as it is diverse, incorporating song, dance, costume, parade, visual art, community collective participation, and charitable goodwill. Jack Yeats's image and the text printed with it in the green sheaf capture some of the common features of Ireland's Wren Day Festival. And those include a musical parade through the streets by the Wren Boys or the Ran Boys, led by someone holding up a small holly tree decorated with colorful ribbons. And the tree was originally topped with the corpse of the hunted and murdered wren, but by the 19th century, this practice had mostly been abandoned, and the bird was either omitted or replaced with an effigy. To this day, the Ran Boys travel from door to door, singing, dancing, and playing music, and asking for contributions. Donations are elicited in song, one traditional version of which you can see printed below the image. The wren, the king of all birds, St. Stephen's Day was caught in the furs. So up with the kettle and down with the pan, your honor is a decent man. So why is the wren king of all birds, and why is its ritual sacrifice celebrated on St. Stephen's Day? The origins are lost in the mists of time, but it is known that the wren was sacred to the Druids. Later, when missionaries were trying to stamp out pagan practices in Ireland, the wren was blamed for betraying St. Stephen, the first Christian martyr. In any case, stories around Wren Day were recorded in 1843 when Irish-born journalist Samuel Carter Hall and his wife Anna Maria wrote about the Wren Day Festival in Ireland, its scenery, character, etc. A book that was illustrated with wood engravings after drawings by the Irish artist Daniel McNeish. Notably, both authors and artists hailed from Ireland's West Country and would have likely experienced similar Wren Day festivals in their childhoods. The Halls included a version of the Ran, the king of all birds, that lyric, in their book, as we saw in the green sheaf, but they also included a legend explaining how the little bird achieved its royal status by meeting the challenge to fly higher than any other bird. It accomplished this feat by hitching a ride on the eagle's tail and then soaring above it when it became too tired to fly any further. Perhaps because the wren is a trickster figure, the Wren Boys amused their audiences with pranks, buffoonery, and quips. It's interesting to compare the Wren Day illustrations by McNeish from 1843 and Yeats from 1904. Both emphasize the holly tree decorated with ribbons and the noisy parade through the streets. Although in contrast to McNeish's ribald and possibly drunken adults, Yeats shows an orderly march of juvenile Wren Boys. Neither artist depicts some of the other aspects of Wren Day celebrations that I discovered in my sources. And these include Wren Boys leading the procession with a hobby horse, blackening their faces or putting on masks, and wearing costumes and hats made of straw. Although I do think there is some straw sticking out of the boys' boots in Yeats's picture, if you look closely. In any case, I would hazard a guess that the Wren Day festivities observed by Yeats and McNeish in their respective Irish childhoods and recorded 60 years apart may have been very similar in their localized traditions. The two artists certainly shared an interest in celebrating Irish life throughout their respective careers. Today, Jack Yeats is recognized as one of the major Irish artists of the 20th century, whose landscapes and characters have, as Michael Connerty comments, become part of the store of national iconography. And presumably this image of the Wren Day celebrations is part of that national iconography, though I wasn't able to confirm that. In the 1890s, Jack Yeats became one of the leading figures in Ireland's cultural revival, along with his brother, William Butler Yeats, the poet, and his sisters, Susan and Elizabeth Yeats, the founders of the Doneamer Guild and Press. Although not Irish herself, Pamela Colman Smith, an Anglo-American artist, performer, and publisher, was deeply involved in the cultural revival through her friendship and collaborations with the Yeats family. Smith contributed to a variety of Yeats family projects, designing textiles and hand printing with the Yeats sisters at Doneamer, designing sets and costumes and creating illustrated prints for W.B. Yeats's theatrical ventures, and editing limited edition hand-colored print objects with Jack. Smith began publishing hand-colored prints and limited editions in the form of books of ballads in New York in 1899, prior to her emigration to England at the turn of the century. So this means that it's possible that she may have introduced Yeats to the practice of hand coloring or helped him to adapt it after she moved to London and they began working together on a broadsheet in the early years of the 20th century. Smith adapted her own hand coloring method from her work with miniature theaters, and this was an interest that Jack Yeats shared. So it's possible that the two artists arrived at their hand coloring practices separately through this common experience with using stencils to tint the printed sheets of characters and sets for their individual toy theaters. A broadsheet, which you can see on the screen, adapts the format of the earlier popular medium of the broadside for a modern audience. So it's a single sheet of handmade paper with hand-set type, and it's printed and illustrated with hand-colored line blocks. And its content, both visual and verbal, features Irish folklore and content supplied by family and friends. And you can see on the slide that Smith and Yeats contribute about the same number of illustrations for the this broadsheet of April 1902, the example I'm showing you. The hand coloring for a broadsheet was done by Jack, his sister Lily, and Pamela Colman Smith, his co-editor. In 1903, Smith stepped away from her collaboration with Jack on a broadsheet in order to launch a monthly little magazine of her own, the Green Sheaf. Unlike a broadsheet, the Green Sheaf's 13 issues ranged from 8 to 16 pages and sometimes included supplements. They were all printed on handmade paper and all hand-colored by Smith herself, possibly with the assistance of students at her Green Sheaf School of Hand Coloring, which she operated out of her studio in Chelsea, also the location of her self-publishing activity for the Green Sheaf. So unlike a broadsheet, which was published by Elkin Matthews, Pamela Colman Smith brought out the Green Sheaf herself, although Matthews did distribute it. Jack Yeats's illustration for the Wren Day Festival was the leading image in the Green Sheaf's 10th issue, which came out in early winter 1904. The solid black frame around the image sets it off from the surrounding page, and Yeats's sketchy black lines illuminate the snowy landscape and add a sense of movement to the Wren boys' march. Smith's hand coloring palette features pink and red tints offset with blue. Her washes brilliantly convey the chill quality of evening light at the end of the year. Smith honors Yeats's disposition of white and black by leaving the bottom half of the image uncolored, emphasizing the snow-covered road and the Wren boys, cheeks rosy with the winter cold as they march along. From the first time I saw this image in the Green Sheaf, I thought the collaboration between artist and colorist was completely in sync. excuse me, the black and white design beautifully and subtly enhanced by these touches of tint. So I'm really glad that the Illustrating Festival's topic gave me an opportunity to explore the art of Jack Yeats and the Irish Festival of Wren Day. And I just want to say, if you're interested in following up and looking at it yourself in the green sheaf itself, it's hard to find that hard copies of that magazine, but you can find digital edition of it on the Yellow 90s 2.0. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lorraine. I'm glad we gave you the opportunity to pursue this, and we had the opportunity to benefit from the research that you've just done. So thank you very much for that. So our final speaker in this session is Francesca Tansini, who is visiting research fellow at the University of Newcastle. So over to Francesca.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you very much. I see there are many dear friends among the participants, so allow me to send my best wishes to everyone connected. So I'll share my screen, and I hope you can see it. So let's start by stating the obvious. Christmas was in Victorian times and still is today a pivotal date for the marketing of books. Some of the most common childhood recollections from the Victorians include the visit to bookshops at Christmas time for the purchase of books as presents. And British artist Walter Crane makes no exception when he remembers stopping as a child at one of London's oldest bookshops to feast my eyes, he writes, on the illustrated Christmas books displayed there. Now, this brief talk will focus precisely on Walter Crane, an artist in whose career Christmas is a recurring subject. Together with Randolph Caldecott and Kate Greenaway, the other two academicians of the nursery, as they were dubbed, Walter Crane soon became a symbol for Christmas itself, caricaturized on the pages of Punch in the United Kingdom, by Lindsay Sanborn and Henry Furness, and by Thomas Nast in Harper's Weekly in the US. Thomas Nast, who put one of Crane's major successes, The Baby's Opera, in Santa's hands as the perfect Christmas present ever. So in his long career, spanning from the 1860s to 1915, Walter Crane illustrated several books set at Christmas time. He widely contributed to annuals, Christmas special numbers, and Christmas supplements of magazines. On his cover for Routledge's Christmas Annual 1870, Crane displays objects and characters closely connected to Victorian Yuletide. A couple pull open a Christmas cracker and read the jokes surrounded by Christmas bonbons. A favorite nursery rhyme character, such as Little Jack Horner eats his Christmas pie. The couple kiss under a sprig of mistletoe, and there are pantomime characters everywhere. We see Clown, Pantaloon, Columbine, Harlequin, the policeman. So among Crane's Christmas-themed works, there is also a cover design for the collection of short stories, Crackers for Christmas, with the eponymous Christmas cracker that once pulled open releases ogres, witches, and magic animals, and the moustached Nutcracker doll, an object recently imported from Germany, possibly under the good auspices of Prince Albert. But most importantly, Christmas was the perfect setting for many picture books, or toy books as they were called, illustrated by Crane. In the old courtyard, there are mistletoe, music, dances, and banquets. In Annie and Jack to London, people are skating in Kensington Gardens, and the kids return home full of toys from their visit to London. Up to the Triumphs of King Lucky Boy's Party, a toy book in which the child, King Lucky Boy, receives the months in procession, each accompanied by its seasonal attributes and zodiacal signs. So General Janus, which is obviously January, in snowshoes and gaiters, escorted by skaters, is accompanied by his footman Aquarius. February comes with Valentine's Day and the fishes, and March with the March hare. November and December come along, and December, sprinkled with snow, is personified by Santa himself, riding a Capricorn with red cloak, crowned top hat, a Christmas tree, and of course a Christmas pudding in his pocket. Another book with a similar plot, produced by Crane exactly 30 years later, is again about festivities in procession. In this case, it is the new year at its coming of age that invites the days at its place. Here, Christmas Day, crowned with mistletoe, has a red cloak trimmed with ermine, and the embroideries inventoried ingredients for a traditional Christmas banquet. Turkey, Christmas pudding, people bringing food and uncorking bottles. Christmas is widely visually described also on greeting cards and calendars. For example, in this image in 1873, Crane illustrated a calendar in the shape of a booklet for Marcus Ward and Co. that was also published as a set of 4 cards. The last card, Christmas Day, is showed here by side to its preparatory drawing at the British Museum and represents carols, singers, and robins. Yet another series of greeting cards was published as a color-printed full-page illustration on the Graphic Christmas Supplement 1874. And here there are 4 designs by Crane, plus 2 more, quite upsetting, by William Ralston, a cartoonist for Punch and The Graphic. The set is particularly interesting because it is all devoted to Christmas, and Crane's 4 designs, all monogrammed, elegantly portray the passing of time in a metaphor of a figure of dance. A group of children gathered around an enormous Christmas stocking, a plump Mr. Christmas on his carriage in a sort of plebiscitarian election as the everyman's candidate, and a personification of Fortuna, which is luck, as a lady holding a pack of cards in a wheel of fortune. These designs appeared on the Graphic, were also issued as separate Christmas cards, possibly commissioned by the magazine itself as a promotional gift. Yet another series of at least 2 cards was published at that very same year, 1874. Both cards are monogrammed. The first one portrays Christmas Rex, that is King Santa, seated on a throne with the stylized silhouette of the Crystal Palace, surrounded by pantomime characters again. The second one depicts 2 unidentifiable, extremely old people or animals. They make a toast holding hourglass-shaped goblets, and their conversation is reported as in a comic strip. The frame again includes a stylized silhouette of the Crystal Palace. But Crane's true Christmas jubilation is to be found in the so-called black books, that is to say, albums of sketches realized by Crane for his own children. These albums were based on the kids' daily life, transfigured in the stories Crane told and drew for them. Each evening, he made a drawing in each child's black book, leaving it by the bedside as a surprise for them in the morning. Sometimes they act, as in this case, as travel diaries, as this one realized in Rome in winter 1882. Other times, they document domestic goings-on in the kids' lives, as with the Christmas fireworks lighted by Walter and his younger sons, Lionel and Lancelot, during the month of December, again personified by Santa riding a Capricorn. Family events are often blended with fairy tales. The preparation of Christmas pudding, for example, with young Lancelot stirring the dough, originates a procession of ingredients: almonds and raisins, candied oranges, sweets of any kind, as the sugar sticks held by Walter and Lancelot themselves. The examples could be many, culminating in a series of drawings realized for Lionel in 1885, one of the very few published during Crane's lifetime by Hassall and Co. Here, Jack Frost, Thaw, and Fog all escort Lionel in the land of Christmas trees, and note that the trees have smiling faces. Where the door is opened by a turkey in livery, supported by attendant sausages, followed by plum pudding and mince pies, by a regiment of crackers and a rain of bonbons. A true apotheosis of Christmas, focused this time, rather than on Santa, on the festive procession of food and sweets. So please allow me, a non-British person, to say that Crane was able to parade and bring to life all the most quintessentially British elements of Christmas time. Not only Santa, but also and mainly Christmas puddings and mince pies, Christmas crackers, bonbons and fireworks, and Christmas pantomimes. Thank you.
Lovely, fantastic, Francesca. What a lovely run up to Christmas with all those wonderful images, and far more festive than all the baubles and tinsel that currently line our arcades. I guess the question for all of you, which is really about archives and collections for Hassall, Seymour, Coleman and Crane, as to where general collections of these artists can be found, and if there is sort of archives that they've left behind, if you were lucky. Don't know which order. Right, let's start with Chris. Let's go the order you came in then.
It's a really quick answer.
Yeah.
No. And I just lost. Oh wait, maybe I did that. Wait.
So how did you go about gathering what you have gathered?
I bought it
Okay.
on the internet.
eBay.
Yeah, and wonderful conversations with independent booksellers, just delighted that some American had a bizarre passion for Joan Hassall's Ephemera. But no, I'm not aware of any collection where you can actually, and not even I didn't even go to the British Library to watch, to look at Hassall's materials. I really did just buy it, and there isn't a lot. So it's a part of a larger collection of women wood engravers that takes up a number of shelves in my house. And again, you can see some lots of reproductions if I eventually finish the book and get it published. It will come out from the University of Minnesota Press, if I'm quick, in 2024.
Okay, thank you. University of Wolverhampton, you've raised your hand. Is there a problem?
Sorry, that is me, Amelia. We've just had a question in the Q&A for Francesca. And they said, Walter Crane's pictures are wonderfully colourful and vivid. Do you know anything about the printing process?
Yeah, sorry. So yes, and the work by Crane for Marcus Ford and Co. was obviously chromolithographed, while the cards, the times are changed, and the Christmas wreaths and the 4 that were also reproduced on the graphic are from relief blocks, and I would say that they were printed by Edmund Evans, is Crane's typical printer and engraver. But it's quite interesting because the full page published in the graphic, I think it's chromolithographed, while the single cards are printed by relief. So this again would be something to be, I don't know, to be further studied a bit. And about the collections, so Crane collections are scattered on the 2 sides of the oceans. So obviously in the UK, there is the Walter Crane archive at Manchester University, between the John Rylands Library and the Whitworth Art Gallery. And of course, there are important funds at the Victorian Albert Museum, British Museum, Oxford Bodleian Libraries, and of course the British Library, while in the United States there are two major collections at Harvard and Yale. But to be honest, I haven't managed to work on the archive of Marcus Ward, and this is something that I would like to do in the future, since I am working on a descriptive bibliography of the work of Walter Crane, so I really need to have a look at that. And also I see that there is a note by Tony. Yes, it is. So the reference, the left animal having a foot with bandages is for sure a reference to gout. But I don't think it was a warning. I mean, something moralistic. I think it was something fun about the old times and not recognizing you know, all the changes of modern times, of Victorians. So yes, I don't know if I answered, but.
Any questions for Brian or Lorraine? Or maybe Lorraine and Brian want to address the question about archives and collections?
Well, I can say something about Seymour, certainly scattered. And there is no, well, I've had a first go at bibliography because a lot of his work's anonymous, it's in minor periodicals and so on. And I published a book on Seymour 2 years ago, first book on Seymour, and the bibliographies of his work takes up about 7 pages. And certainly in 1832, he was illustrating perhaps over 20 magazines during the course of the year. So we don't really know what he did. A lot of it is anonymous, some of it's guesswork. It's a big issue. He's scattered all over the world, and a lot of his stuff will never be identified.
Thank you. Lorraine?
Yes, just very quickly. I mean, there are good resources on Jack Yeats's work, including complete print runs of the broadsheet in Dublin. Pamela Coleman-Smith has not been well archived or preserved. In fact, people don't know her work as much as they should. But Mark Samuels Lasner at the University of Delaware Library, Museums and Press, in his collection there's some materials on Pamela Coleman-Smith, including the complete print run of a Green Sheaf, on which our digital edition is based. And Bryn Mawr, close by to Delaware, has a modest archive of some of her letters and papers. But she's not been well served by time to date.
Okay, thank you. There are no more questions in the Q&A. It's just 6 o'clock and we have the second half of the event to move on to. So thank you to the 4 speakers who have opened the event. It was an excellent range of talks that you all gave, and I'm sure the second half is going to be equally informative. So we are going to start the second half with David Steele. David's had a career in the print industry, and I believe has recently completed his PhD at the University of Warwick. So over to Dave.
Thank you. If you got that screen okay?
Perfect. Thank
Good.
you.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, interestingly, this is not so such a seasonal festive theme. So I've interpreted the idea of festivals more widely, really, in terms of the sort of summer musical festivals, if you like. So as a historian, I'm usually talking about other people's lives from the past, but this time I'm asking your indulgence as the subject is actually myself, as I was there at the time involved in this. And in this talk, I want to talk about the network of low-tech DIY community printers producing designs for the emerging festival movement in the 1970s. And many borrowed designs and techniques to produce a sort of innocent naivety, if you like, characteristic of the time. And here's a photo of me at the time, disreputable as I was, maybe. I left school with poor A-level results, and instead of going to university, as my dad hoped, I hitchhiked up north pursuing idealistic dreams of joining the then burgeoning counterculture network. And after spending time at a community arts project in Toxteth, Liverpool, I wound up in Hull in East Yorkshire with a bunch of self-appointed Robin Hood-style heroes who call themselves the Outsiders, doing sort of self-appointed worthy community work. And the Outsiders provided food, shelter and accommodation for homeless men, as well as helping families in the slum clearance areas of Hull navigate the social security and council housing systems. This work was self-funded by providing a removal service and also a disco for students in the city and university. But one thing they didn't have was adequate printed publicity. And so at one late night meeting, I don't remember volunteering, but I was volunteered to investigate silkscreen printing, and that set the tone for the rest of my career as it happened. And I got a manual and duly set up a print room in my attic bedroom in our back-to-back with begged, borrowed and homemade DIY equipment, and set about teaching myself the craft of screen printing. Now, the Outsiders had considered themselves superheroes long before my arrival, invoking imagery from Marvel comic books character Galacticus that you can see here. And I wanted to strengthen this brand, but although I was beginning to teach myself design and layout, I had absolutely no talent as an illustrator. So I enlisted the help of a friend and artist, Steve Carr. But we soon set up, excuse me, independently of Outsider, and established the Whatever Next art workshop, spending the next couple of years trying to make a living out of design and print while learning as we went along. And here you can see one of our sort of naive attempt at publicity with another superhero, Nix Kliss, which is silkscreen in reverse. And naturally, one of our first clients were the Outsiders from whom we'd come. And I came up with a Monopoly board concept for a poster for a fundraising gig, which kind of led into some of the work that we did later. The interesting thing is the variety of techniques that we used, including photographic stencils, but quite often we just had to make do and mend with little resources. And so here you have a pencil drawing to make cutout paper stencils, and hand painted the lettering, the smaller lettering, with block out filler, like this example here. And this is one of the points that I want to raise, really, that in later life, as I become more interested in print history, I come to recognize that this sort of pragmatic improvisation wasn't something new. It was a recurring feature of printers across all fields and across all time, from letterpress right through to digital. Cost and time pressures constantly forcing people, in our case, to bodge up and make do and mend with temporary workarounds. But just as early letterpress printers would often repurpose type when they were short of some characters, we also often cut letraset characters apart and turn them upside down. But I wonder where improvisation ends and innovation begins. And on a design front, again, nothing's original, and we weren't original. We were constantly borrowing from reference books and poster collections, as seen in this design of ours for an Art Deco style 3-color Outsider disco poster. And here we did use photo stencils, but instead of photographic positive acetates, which we couldn't afford, we simply hand painted the design onto cheap tracing paper, but still here, as you can see, taking care to include registration marks because the type register was essential. And sometimes the results were really quite slapdash, as in these gig posters that we were commissioned to do by Hull University Students' Union. Soon, luckily, we were listed in a directory of community activist craft printers, which was a sort of national directory, and which proved handy for us in attracting commissions from further afield. So now I want to move on to the intersection of these community activists and the counterculture and the burgeoning free festival movement, of which the free festivals in Windsor Great Park were one example. There had been festivals there for several years, starting with jazz festivals and art festivals in the 60s. But in 1973, the attendance jumped from 1,000 to 10,000 punters, and it started to attract the interest of the authorities. Maverick hippie organiser Ubi Dwyer, who you can see here on the right, planned to increase the event to 20,000 in 1974. And in the need for publicity, he must have consulted the community print directory in which he found our name. And he commissioned us to design and print 100 double crown posters. I can't overstate what a coup this was for a couple of fledgling hippie printers. So I put everything into research for the design. And I wanted to get across this sort of superhero theme, but not being a particularly talented designer, I set about, again, pinching ideas from elsewhere, starting with Apollo, the god of music and dance that you can see on the top left here. And I think, looking back, I may also have had in mind influenced images of the balanced scales of justice on the bottom left, and the Celtic god and, dare I say, superhero Lou in the middle here. But my final inspiration came from The Juggler's Son by designer and architect Claude Fayette Bragdon, from the cover of an 1890s Chicago literary magazine, The Chapbook. And when you see the poster that I did next, it's an almost direct lift of this image in the center here. So combined again with the Monopoly board concept that we'd already used for other posters, but now celebrating festival themes of arts and music, along with the themes of ecology and drug culture in the form of a cannabis leaf border. And dare I say it, and I can't believe that I actually put this, psychedelicatessens in the bottom right. I wanted to get across the idea of balance with the arms of Apollo simultaneously holding up the fragile earth and the fun concept of the smiley, recently appropriated as a fun symbol of hippie drug culture. But notice all the printing errors where the stencil is inked in and the blurry nature of the border. But somehow I think this amateurish nature of this poster, along with the many thousands of others that were popping up at the time, somehow captures the combination of innocence and idealism which we all had at the time. We felt we could do anything. I've still got my account book. We printed around 100 copies of these on end-of-roll newsprint from the whole Daily Mail offices, which you can see we picked up here for just 22p. And we charged £2 for the first 100. And as you can see from his thank you letter, Ubi Dwyer liked them so much that he asked us to print as many as we could for an extra £3. And I recall we ended up doing around 400, which were fly posted all over London and the South East, but I never actually saw a single one in public. And I can see here that my wages for that week were £4. So what happened next? Well, we did go to that festival for some of the time, but the police broke it up. And despite attempts to relaunch it in 1975 and 76, it never really got off the ground. But the spirit of the free festival movement lived on in the form of the Stonehenge festivals, which you've probably all heard about, which started soon after. And here's some of the sort of naive images that we used to publicise that event. As far as my own print career was concerned, after repeated business failures, and despite several attempts at relaunching the business in rural Gloucestershire, whatever next was never a financial success. But within 4 years, I was running a full-colour planning and plate making department in a Midland litho printers, attracting clients including Gerald's and Pergamon Press. And here's some of the work that we did on the right here. So quite a leap, really, but it just shows that how just starting off completely untrained, and I think a lot of people do this, can lead from one thing to another. My print career in the end spanned a further 50 years, moving on to instant print, desktop publishing, postscript, and latterly I've been digital advisor and trainer to print and creative industries. But I have no regrets trying to make it work and look back fondly on my early days silkscreen posters for the community activists and counterculture festivals. So to conclude, the counterculture brought a burst of creativity, often invoking classic themes of mysticism and graphic imagery. Our workshop was just one of many hundreds across the UK, matched by thousands across the world, and particularly the west coast of the US. Precarious budgets were a recurring feature which encouraged a culture of make, do and mend and workarounds. And I argue that this combination of improvisation and innovation is a feature of the early stages of many forms of printing throughout history, from letterpress to digital. And finally, I'd just like to dedicate this talk to my good friend and colleague, Steve Carr, who worked with me in those early days, but sadly never lived to see the digital revolution in design and print. But I tell you, he would have really loved it. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Dave. I think you're right. I think so many people in the printing industry have come into it in an untrained manner from Gutenberg through to Baskerville and beyond. It's really not unusual in the profession, I think. So our second speaker in this session is Joanne McNEISH. Joanne is Associate Professor of Marketing at Toronto Metropolitan University. So over to Joanne.
Sorry, I made the same mistake one of the other speakers did, which is you tried to share before you unmute. There we go. Okay, so there should be a slide in front of you that shows the title. So I'm actually going to pick up, and this surprises me, but it should have all Dave's presentation. So I came at this talk business and marketing perspective. And I actually had the greatest difficulty when I started, in that I expected to see the normal progress of technology, in that one would replace the next. And it is the absolute brilliance of the printing industry that that's not actually true. The quality of most of the major presses is that an old machine rarely becomes obsolete, but rather it's sold to another printing company in the same country or to other countries. And this notion of a craft printing industry is literally ingrained in the way that printers think about their industry. And there's a term that's been coined recently, which is non-disruptive creation. So most people are taught the advantages of disruptive or evolutionary creation. But in fact, printers seem to have organically adopted the idea that when a new market is created, you don't tear down or displace others. Rather, the new path of innovation allows the old technology to coexist alongside of the new. And so, in fact, printers use mistakes, competitive challenges, and threats from computers to push their own creativity and innovation. That doesn't set aside the business pressures, but basically printers always use the best quality printing technologies to create the best job the client could afford. So unlike Dave's presentation, where he focused on craft and almost a startup version of printing, mine is more the focus on commercial printing. And so over 76 years, and my focus are 75 years of the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, printing presses evolved alongside of folding, cutting, and binding machines, paper, ink formats and their application to paper, copy machines, and computer hardware and software. And by the way, 75 years in a printing industry is actually not a very long time. And my source material is actually a collection of ephemeral from the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, and it's actually found at the National Library of Scotland. And there's a wonderful archivist there, Trevor Thompson. I'd love to give him a shout out, who has been so supportive in my investigation of this collection. And there's about 500,000 pieces in the collection, but his time is very divided, so the limited catalog has been done. So this represents an amazing opportunity for researchers. I do want to start with a bit of a disclaimer in that the ephemeral in the collection is only available in hard copies. And so the images used in this presentation are actually sourced from the Edinburgh Fringe Society with permission, Creative Commons, and actually an artist permission. And a secondary disclaimer, my son is actually a stand-up comedian, so I had his permission to use the images in the later part of the presentation. So I mentioned the overlap in printing technology. So there don't appear to exist pieces from 1950s or even the origin of the festival. Sort of the earliest pieces that I can show you are from the 1960s, but the collection does contain pieces from the 1950s. And here we see. Actually, it's part of a playbill, and in the earliest flyers and waybills are lost in the mists of history, but this is a very early example using letterpress technology. And we see this first overlap of letterpress, which is where the raised surface is coated in ink and the paper pressed onto it. And that's in contrast to lithography. So lithography had existed for many decades before, but it's interest into the commercial application is where I identify sort of its date of its strongest emergence. That didn't mean that letterpress went away. In fact, letterpress continues to exist because for specialty printing, still used because the subsequent machines aren't necessarily the best for embossing and oil stamping. And for hobby printists or craft printing, the machines have been shrunk or are available in their full size for use by craft printing. So in the 1970s, though, we begin to see the use of lithography, but simultaneously with letterpress. So here's where the letters are broken up. And so this is an example of letterpress, but in the same period, the use of lithography. And lithography can be typically identified because of the title of the Golden City, the smoothness of its edges. And I'm going to show you both the Golden City in the form used with illustration, but here we see hand lettering that's clearly applied to something that's been printed, and then what is now called photocopy, but at the time was xerography, so the ability to make multiple copies. And I think the thing that fascinates me also, and really resonate, and why Dave's talk really resonated with me, is the idea of paper and printing as a form of resistance. And so while people understood the commercial advantage of keeping a brand consistent, the ability to actually handwrite and then copy in a copy shop, or frankly, even in an office or in a university library for free, allowed people to present multiple copies as a way of promoting production for much lower cost, but still understanding the advantages of a consistent brand. So this is an example of also lithography and offset lithography, and that only makes a change in terms of the ability to speed up the process. So I won't get into the technical difficulties in terms of because of time, but there's some interesting differences in the quality. But we can see now here in offset lithography, at first, you couldn't get the gradations of color that was still possible with letterpress. And I've done some interviews with printers who've been in the business a long time, and on is in fact the quality of the printing. They still prefer letterpress, and certainly that's reflected in packaging, for example, where that's a superior technology for exact kinds of printing. The 1980s brought about the beginnings of a time when color became less expensive. So this is not an example of 4-color, but it's in fact two colors, a two-color print process. And that's in contrast with later images that I'll show you, where you begin to see the use of four-color printing and the beginnings of the introduction of digital / laser printing. And in terms of, again, definitional structure, it is, again, this overlapping sense of printing technologies where people appear to use the terms interchangeably. Then there's an author that in fact creates a more discrete categorization. So I put them in the order that laser comes before digital in common usage. But in fact, at the time of laser printing, there's also LED printing. So laser printing is the application of the image using light. Digital printing refers to your ability to use the internet and then cloud-based technology to transfer the information. But they tend to all begin and emerge at the same time, but don't overtake offset lithography, but rather operate at the same time as. The other thing that began to happen, and you begin to see here where the images and the text stand apart from each other, whereas here we begin to see the interaction between the text in the 1990s and the imagery. So what computers introduced into the images was the ability to work on all the design elements at the same time. And so once again, I just remind you that you'll see this in the flyer and the ephemeral from the Edinburgh Fringe, but these are the images that I could use with permission in public. And the introduction now of the use of photographs that in the past would have been grainy and indistinct. We see the quality improvement with the use of light forms of printing, so laser and LED forms of printing, as well as the blending so that all the elements work together rather than being applied on separate plates from each other. They can all be applied and therefore appear to be much more integrated. Just watching my time. 2000, in fact, saw a drop in cost of printing and the ability for individual comedians. So again, comedy and the Edinburgh Fringe began as a resistance movement to the International Edinburgh Festival. And here we see the two sides of the same flyer. Previous to this, people would only print on one side because it used to cost a lot more to pass the flyer through the printing machine twice. Now we see the application of completely different colors and ink, the use of illustration and photographs, and beautifully done photographs. So very clear photographs and white type on black, which is clearly written. So that the printing technology, so in addition to the machines itself, people had to work on the font production technology, as well as the kind of color and ink technologies that would adhere better and more strongly, both to glossy or coated papers and non-coated papers. So then we come all the way up to the 2010s and we see less distinction in the quality of printing. But now what we're going to begin to see is the interaction with new kinds of ways of communicating. So up until now, in terms of the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, we've grown to something like 4,000 performers, many of whom would be considered unknown performers. Of course, there would be headliners, but they were largely unknown. And the only way to reach people when you're at the festival would be through the distribution of flyers. And so we're now into hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of individual flyers. And so how do you stand out in terms of this? But in the 2010s, that is the introduction of social media for commercial purposes, as well as the internet. And you can see in this flyer, there actually isn't any social media, which you would have thought by now people would be using. The other thing that it's kind of fascinating, and this is where print is so extraordinary, we see the beautifully, so the flyer can be produced in many different sizes, very economic poster size. And finally, though, we see the very traditional application of a black and white piece of paper, but highlighting reviews that happen over the course of the festival. And these can now be done in a very few minutes on a very inexpensive black and white office printer. But these used commercially by printers in the 1980s to make reproductions now could be used by an individual performer using an office printer. This merging of the two kinds of technologies. And finally, in the 2020s, the printer, as I said, is constantly innovating and reacting, but not leaving behind the previous technologies. So this would be done with laser printing technologies, but with the addition now of social media, as well as a QR code. So a QR code is a phenomenal piece of technology, allows an interaction with the performer. So social media and QR codes were introduced as a substitute for papers. Printers don't see things as substitutes. They look for the addition to and the enhancement of the printing technology. And social media and QR codes allowed for interaction with the performer through continuously the paper flyer. And so for me, what is fascinating about this and what requires so much more work now is the understanding of how the printing technology evolved into such a forward-thinking form of innovation rather than destruction. It is the continuous use, the creation of high-quality printing presses, and then the adoption of technology as they go along. Yes, for commercial survival, but it is as if it's a mind that is about addition rather than destruction. And I think that's my time.
On to our final speaker, which is Anthony Quinn. Tony is a freelance journalist and he runs a very useful and interesting website called Mag Forum, which is a resource for anyone interested in the history of magazines. Over to Tony.
Thank you. Thank you. I shall just get my screen up. And then, okay, has everyone seen that?
Yeah, we can see that.
Jolly good, thank you. I'm just going to do a quick gallop through some good old-fashioned magazine Christmas numbers and then look at their modern equivalents. And in the process, we'll see how publishers applied their strategy from festivals and broadened it out to some quite odd things as well. If we go to the next slide, I'll start the talk in 1855. This is the Illustrated London News. It's Christmas supplement, and the first one they did with a colour cover. And this was printed with in 3 colours using wood blocks by the Leighton brothers. And this habit of these Christmas specials was expanded to many magazines. And if you walk into your newsagents in the UK this week, you'll or over the coming weeks, you'll see special double editions over Christmas and New Year of magazines as varied as the Radio Times, The Economist, The Spectator, and The New Scientist. Now, the technology there doesn't look particularly brilliant by today's standards, but they certainly improved it. And this is 40 years later, 1899, and this is the colour cover for the Christmas issue then. And notice that these are large format magazines. This page is actually the size of a modern day tabloid newspaper. And they then did spin-offs. This was a children's edition of a Christmas special. And notice here that you've got this Japanese lantern, which had a candle inside it, which the child is lighting. And you'll see those used an awful lot. This is an example of Japanese influence in UK media. Now, as well as having a celebration, you needed often somewhere to celebrate. And these are two covers from 1906 on the left and 1913. And these colour covers again showing the entrance hall, the foyer of the Savoy Hotel on the Strand in London. And this, of course, is when you're looking at the Edwardian era, just before the First World War, when British society was probably at its richest and certainly its most partyful. Next, we go to the Gentlewoman magazine. Again, this is from 1911. And this isn't a cover, this is the frontispiece inside the magazine. And this gives us an early example of Mother Christmas. And she's shown drinking to the health of readers of the Gentlewoman the world over, while poor old Father Christmas feels out in the cold, shivering behind her. And that's an illustration by John Hassall, famous illustrator, best known these days for his Skegness is So Bracing poster. As well as magazines and editorial, you have advertising. And we've already had some reference to crackers in one of the earlier talks. And this is an advert from 1915 for Tom Smith's crackers. And Tom Smith is supposed to have invented the Christmas cracker back in 1847. Now, I mentioned this Japanese globe earlier on, and here we have an example in 1918, so about 20 years after the previous example, but this is for a New Year's celebration on the monthly London magazine. And again, you can see the reveller with her globe, but this one is Cheerio, or Cheero rather than just being Christmas. Now, as I say, we've got a bit of broadening out here from Christmas into the new year. And the magazine started to apply this strategy to all sorts of events, from funerals to births, marriages, deaths, jubilees, and so on, particularly, of course, for the royal family. And also, they applied it to, as I say, seasons of the year. So we have a summer reading number on the left of John O. London's Weekly, which would normally have been a self-cover, purely black and white, very text-based magazine. But as I say, they did seasonal reading numbers in the autumn and summer, and also at Christmas. On the right-hand side, we have Baby Week for the Ladies' Companion. And this is actually a clever use of a three-colour cover. You've got a black, and you've got a red, and a tint of the red is used to colour the baby to give an impression of a four-colour cover. And this, we've dropped back now to 1901. This is the funeral of Queen Victoria, where her coffin was transported from the Isle of Wight, where she died, where she had her summer home, and she was taken in the royal yacht, which you can see in the centre of the picture there, and escorted by the great ironclad ships of the era, and you can see them, they're giving her a gun salute, hence all the smoke and everything. And this is a pretty massive illustration. It's a double-page spread. Again, it's a tabloid-sized double-page spread. And now we jump forward to 1948 with one of the cheap weekly magazines for women, Home Notes. And this cover is celebrating the royal silver wedding. And this is King George and Queen Mary, who was the parents, of course, of the late Queen Elizabeth II. Talking of Queen Elizabeth II, this is the coronation number of the Radio Times. Now we're seeing here the front cover on the right and the back cover on the left. I noticed the yellow ink, which when it was printed originally, this would have looked goldy. And there's also, you've got these crowns printed across the background. And the back page is actually an advert for Bachelor's Foods. And both the illustration on the front cover and the illustration on the back cover, they've been done by Eric Fraser, who was one of the most famous and quality illustrators of the era. The next two images, oops, I've gone the wrong way. I've definitely gone the wrong way. Yeah, whoops, my apologies. We'll have to start that again. These are from 1951, which was the Festival of Britain. And these are two different approaches, one by Punch on the left, and the other by the Sphere. The Sphere's approach is very practical, showing an aerial view of the site of the Festival of Britain. You might be able to make out the tall, very thin, dart-like shape of the Skylon in the middle of the picture. And to the right, you've got the Dome of Discovery, where most of the major exhibits were shown. And then you can just see the curve of the river going from the bottom right round the left into the top right. So I'll say two very different approaches. And the magazine started then to celebrate their own festivals, particularly birthday numbers. Here we have Answers, The Spectator, Boxing News. This just shows the masthead in the bottom right, but this to me is a very unboxing masthead. And then we have the Cornell magazine, which was founded in 1861 with its 1000th number in the 1950s at the bottom left. And here we have Time Out celebrating 40 years of Time Out with a special Heroes issue. And these are some of the people who would have featured in the magazine over that time. You've got Helen Mirren, for example, seated at the left. And you'll probably recognize a few faces as you scan across, faces from film and screen and art and so on. And this is a triple gatefold. So this, you've got the magazine cover, more or less A4 size, and it opens out to show 3 extra pages. Very expensive process to do. With the back cover, of course, this sheet of paper is 5 A4 pages wide. So how do you up the ante from there? Well, you perhaps lower the ante. And these are drop-down covers. Very rare examples here because you waste an awful lot of paper. And you've got FHM, which celebrates its High Street Honeys, with a double gatefold, which drops down. And the problem with this is that if you think about where the back cover is, you end up with a sheet of paper 2 A4 pages wide and 3 A4 pages deep, but 2 of those A4 pages at the bottom have to be cut away. And so you're throwing away 1/3 of the paper when you print this cover. And so you can see on the right-hand side, the very right-hand cover, you might just be able to make out there's a line across the bottom, which is where the cover would actually fold out. Now, these are subdued celebrations. The Radio Times at the left shows Father Christmas. However, the magazine has a tradition of not showing Father Christmas in years where it's a bad year. So the cover on the right is the end of 2022, you're coming out of COVID and so on. And so that does not show Father Christmas, who's felt to be too celebratory for the Radio Times magazines. And finally, I'm looking at what I regard as probably the greatest celebration of a festival. And this is the Great Exhibition of 1851. And running across the top of this slide, you can see a very wide, but not very deep strip. And this is the printed souvenir given to subscribers from that year. And the main image shows a sample of that very long strip, because the actual printed object is 20 feet long and tabloid paper size high. So you can imagine this is a very large and a very, very ambitious undertaking by the Illustrated London News in 1851. And despite the efforts of Time Out and FHM and so on, as I say, I don't think they've bettered this. And as I say, it's from 1851, which was 150 years earlier. And on that note, I shall end my talk. Thank you very much for listening.